And our next speaker is Ives Saeger from Belgium. Also, the company he represents, it's called P41. And I guess some of you could decode this, what this title means. And we also cooperate with P41 on what concerns business process innovation. Yves, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
All right, please go ahead.
I hope this will
need
work
your
like
screen.
Fantastic.
So I hope
you're able to see the screen.
Okay, the floor is yours.
Hey, great. Thank you very much. So thank you, Valerie, for the invitation and good afternoon to everybody. As you see, it's not winter 2021; it's already spring in in our area. So I'm going to talk about smart cases for business TRIZ. In fact, I'm going to discuss 2 cases very shortly as an example of a type of a model, which is a bit different than known in TRIZ, but it could be compared to function models. So I'm going to talk about parameter models. And in fact, when I started with the company P41, we did a lot of exercises on function attribute analysis. So we did a lot of stuff on that because I think it's a good approach. It's a good approach due to the linguistical definitions you have inside the boxes. So you're a bit limited on what to write inside the box. And when we did a lot of technological problems, we have a lot of technological solutions. We came up with some problems within function analysis, which is about how do you model quality problems? And so in fact, let me see to go to the next slide. Oh, this is too quick, sorry. So how do you model business or quality issues? And quality issues is a bit difficult in a function analysis model because, yeah, it's the attributes that are conflicting some way. It will not be the functions. So it's more difficult to do that. So we started to think, okay, how can we handle this? And during the years, we got a couple of more projects in the service organization or business-wise exercises. And then we even encountered, okay, function modeling is very difficult to do in business. So the difficulties we found was, okay, you have objects in technical TRIZ, which is things you can touch. These are tangibles. You can take them like a wrench or whatever, or a screwdriver. And these are concrete. You can touch them. So the point is, if you look at more intangible things like love or money, or money is tangible, or attributes, or even like functions. A function for me is, you can't touch a function. You can say, I'm looking at somebody that is walking, but the person is walking. For me, the function is intangible. You cannot take the function as you could take the object. So function is already a bit intangible for me. And every function leads to, let's say, a change of a parameter or an attribute. So the end result of a function impact is that the parameter has been changed or has remained the same. So parameters might be easier to use to describe a more intangible business problem or a quality problem. They're more abstract, you can't touch them, but they might be used in business. So we proceeded with this thinking on how can we use the function modeling, or how can we change the function modeling towards a parameter modeling where we could, let's say, try to do a bit the same as we did in technical TRIZ. And what we actually did was we simply reversed the object with parameters in a function model. So we applied principle 13 to make it more practical. So if you have a subject with parameter A, and this has a specific function, it's doing something to an object which has parameter C. as, let's say, the most pragmatic parameter you want. So this is what we know in function modeling. And what we did was we took the parameter and we twisted around to come up with a parameter A, and you put in brackets the objects. So we did the same for the functions, and you can do the same for the other object. So the difference with the function model is, of course, the function can also have a parameter or an attribute, as do the two objects itself. And then the relation between those two, we found out, are more generalized functions. They're not specific functions like snap fitting. Snap fitting would be a very concrete, very specific function to join two parts. But joining is already a bit more general, but to increase or to change are very generalized functions. So I'll might go into more detail in that. So I started, in fact, I analyzed all technical verbs. There are about 740 technical verbs that we analyzed, and we came up with different categories. So we also saw that you cannot use specific functions inside the parameter model because, well, they don't get lost. They're here. So you get you add your model with some new type of verbs. I will give an example, of course, to make this more practical. The other thing we did was, so this is the graphical language you would use. Everybody will know that if you have a hexagonal part, it's an external supersystem, but now it's an attribute. It's not an object anymore. So if you would have an internal, it's a closed box or rectangle or whatever. But we also applied like this type of modeling because we wanted to define relationships between components. Like in this case, A is a function of C and B, and A is a bigger attribute. So A is a bigger attribute that can be derived functionally from C and B. And then, of course, from a traditional function modeling point of view, you would have like too much A leads to B, and too little C leads to D, and improbable E or too slow A leads to B, and harmful A leads to B. So this is a bit the modeling we started to use in the beginning. And the difference with RCA+, for instance, or SECA models are, for me, there are no sentences anymore. It's in each box, you have one parameter. You might have the object or the function in brackets. So it's more specific, it's more defined, it's more closed. So let me give you some examples of a case. So the first case I'm going to tell you about is was a company that distributes garden materials, like shovels or anything for the garden that you can imagine. Okay, so in fact, this company, they got the orders from their clients, and then they were grouping them to a specific zone, and their normal lead time was about 6.5 days, which was a lot. And the CEO wanted to have a solution to decrease this to at least maximum of 72 hours or 3 days. When we did some analysis on the orders, we found that the distribution, depending on what you chose, this is an interesting point because every company has a different way of looking at lead time. It depends on what you define. So we found out that it was 6.7 days, but depending on if we took more orders, you've got 19 days. So it depends a bit on how you look at this lead time stuff. But the issue was we want to have the customer demands delivered more quickly. Okay, this is clear. Some more things they did. So what they have done is they have divided Belgium. It's not a very big country, but they have divided Belgium into, let's say, a couple of zones, 5 zones, and they gathered all the orders from one zone, and then each day, this person, he is actually drawing on a map where all the orders come from for that day, and then how a trailer, they had 3 owned trailers. So they had people that were driving around, and they left in the morning with a specific set of objects for the customers in that zone. But one of the problems was, how do you divide it? Because I had a lot of troubles with the division of the zones, but you will understand this better later on. So, but this is how they did it. So they divided Belgium, and they wanted to. They only had 3 trailers, so it's too little to do to cover all Belgium. But they started to calculate, okay, how do we need to drive? And in fact, what they, and so now the parameter model, I will show you, this is one of the first models we made, and I almost let it in the original state for you. So we already started coloring what the customer asked. So in orange, the number of pieces are a question from the order. So this is something the customer wants. He wants a number of products. Okay, and these products, they generate a certain revenue or cost for the customer. And this customer has an expected lead time. He wants it as quickly as possible, but their customers knew it was always about 6 days. These specific customers, they are living at specific locations, and they have specific opening hours. It's not like they want their supplier to come in every moment of the day. So there was even a more organizational issue that the trailer had to be at specific points at a specific time in the day, which was an extra difficulty. But at least these parameters lead to, okay, you have, let's say, a type of order in a specific zone. And this zone, for each zone, so each day they created a new route for the trailers. So all 3 trailers rode to those zones. And they had to define, okay, where do they have to drive? And the route will give making this zone and defining the route results in a real lead time, because doing it like this results in the fact that it will only be delivered when they go there, which is logical. And the customer is more worried about the difference between what they expected and what they got. So here you can see like the difference in lead time. The customer would expect tomorrow or within a couple of days, but reality showed 6.7 days at least. Okay. Other parameters, of course, the route will define the revenue. Why? Because it will depend on the load capacity. You have 3 trailers, and if they are filled with, let's say, with products, like suppose you imagine a wheelbarrow, those large wheelbarrows. If you take a lot of wheelbarrows, you can only fill a volume of a trailer, and then it's full. So if you take only wheelbarrows, the customer will be happy, but you don't have a lot of revenue, because a wheelbarrow will cost more, but you can only stack so many in the trailer. So, so the load capacity has an impact on the route, and it has an impact on the revenue, as does the time, because the guy that is making the route also needs to think about how long does it take to actually drive from A to B, from customer to customer. And this route is also dependent and harmed by the traffic jams. In Belgium, we have a lot of traffic jams. We're very disorganized in that sense. So this person needs to take into account all these elements. He needs to take into account, okay, we need to take into account the load capacity. We need to take into account the time. And also, are those parts present in the company or not? I mean, if you're missing or lacking a component, you cannot deliver it. So this also has an impact. Of course it has, but since you have a limited volume, you can only stack as much as you can. So you can imagine if you have 3 trailers and they're full, your revenue is defined. And maybe there's another combination that could generate more revenue, but this might impact the route, and this might impact the time, and you might have another problem. So you see, it's complicated, at least so it seems. So how do you solve this? Okay, this is an example of what I called first model attribute or parameter modeling. The solution, in fact, was very simple. Eliminate the idea of the need of a zone. Why? Because we started looking at, suppose you would work with an external distributor, and in fact, we calculated how much money it would cost to, let's say, work with external distributors and not do it yourself, which would be a more TRIZian way of looking at it. But if you do it yourself, you may have 3 trailers. You don't have the money to do the whole of Belgium at the same time. So you don't. So an external trainer, a distributor, would have an advantage on that. So I calculated it's only 70,000 euros that they would have in a maximum spend more on a year. So they decided immediately to do that. In fact, we were able to decrease the lead time from 6 days to 1 day delivery. Why? Because today the customer is calling for the parts. They pick it immediately in their warehouse. They put it at the doorstep, and the external company is coming and delivers it the day after. So this was a huge breakthrough for this company. They never expected me to come from 6 to 1. Okay, this is one example of parameter modeling. So what have we learned? Well, is this graph exploding, as you can sometimes see in a function model? No, it isn't. And we started using first the verbs also, like the general or generalized verbs, such as adapt or change, or start, stop, attract, repulse, increase, decrease. As opposed to in a function modeling, you use specific verbs like move or flow or melt or whatever. And then we stopped using the verbs because it wasn't very useful. But we started coloring the customers because we wanted to see what is the difference. And we had to, let's say, make some pragmatic choices of attributes because it's a bit fluffy in that sense that you don't know, do you have them all or not? And we also learned not to use general attributes, but to use specific attributes. And from this, we found out that, like Mark Twain says, it's not what you don't know that gets you in trouble, it's what you know for sure that just ain't so. So in the case of this gardening company, their thinking error is in fact the point that they created what they called a zone, but the customer didn't have a zone. They were aware of the fact they are in a zone, but they don't care. So the company created like a parameter, like an attribute, and this resulted in some problems. So in fact, a thinking error would be like a parameter that you choose in the company, and it leads to a set of conflicts. It might even affect the customer. In fact, this parameter wasn't asked by the customer itself. So what we learned also was we created like a method to be more precise on the way to define the parameters, which is they have to be free and they have to be independent. So let me try to, it's red. Okay, so free means they have to be independent. It's like you have the XY codification, you have XY, and you're sure X and Y are independent of each other. And they're also free of each other. So you could define the upwards called Z, and then you would have a 3-dimensional space definition, which is great. So these are all free. So you don't want a W, because W would give you like a linear combination of the other ones. But of course, if you would not come up with the idea of Z, then you would be missing a parameter. So this is a span. You want to create a largest span as possible. So these ways of thinking, we started applying to the attribute or parameter models. We're not always sure, did we have the whole business space? I will give you an example of a case we did also in business where we came up with, we need a bigger span. Okay, so let me give you another example. This is an example concerning an architect company, and they apply for tenders. So a tender, I think you probably will all know, some of the communities sometimes write out a tender, and different architect companies can apply for this tender. And then one of them is chosen, and they can build a school, for instance. So if I'm looking at this company, this specific architect company, they wanted to improve the hit rate. Yesterday, we also had Mr. Petrov explaining something about the hit rate. So I have a bit similar case on hit rate. So how can you improve the hit rate? Because we acknowledge that their hit rate was going down. You see, it's about 40% of their tenders. And the question was, how can you improve this? Another thing to make out is they needed about 10 days with a couple of people to come up with the tender. So it was very costly also. You can see some of the costs written here. So how can you improve that? Okay, so let's make a model after this. You can see I'm using colors to denote the company, the customer, the external, and also people. So we're starting to differentiate in objects, you could say. And first thing you need to define is the tender properties. So the tender properties has a selection criteria. You have to apply to the conditions of the environment. They define a specific environment. You need to have a vision, and this vision needs to be translated in a kind of a quality or a planning or a budget. So you need to have a vision on how to build a nice school. Will it be ecological, or will it be innovative, or will it be whatever? And then you need to have a planning, a quality report with all details, and of course a budget. And before you can apply, of course, you need to be allowed to participate for this tender. So there are selection criteria, and this company is okay. So the next thing this company does is they have a specific culture and they have a capacity of people. So they select a number of people. And these people, they have some experience, but the culture also has a specific habit, comfort. And together with this experience and comfort, you could talk about the way they look at stuff and how they look at aesthetics, which is typical architects. They start drawing immediately. They can't resist. Okay, so so what happens is, so from this vision, they need to look at a specific angle, and then they start to write their own vision, planning, budget, and some spatial explanation in a specific form. And then a jury is appointed. Oh, I'm too quick. Of course, they have to apply according to the rules. But then there is a specific jury, and this jury will decide on the difference between the vision that the community has as compared to the vision that they are presenting. And if you're good, you're selected. At least that's what you hope. We also found out that, okay, those people have a certain network, and the jury also has a network. So they're connected in some form. So the question we came up with to understand, do we have everything, was which design has the most chance of getting an okay? Was it a design after 10 seconds, or would it be a design after 10 days? And the answer to this question is they are both likely. And why? Because they don't actually talk to the community about the tender. There is no communication about this tender. It's just a written paper. They just look at the details, the information on it, and they make something. So we discovered something strange in that sense that we said, yeah, but if you don't talk to these people, you never know what they like or don't like. So you may be having a vision they don't like. So you're making a big chance there. Just a detail, you could say the decisions that these people make are function of the difference. And the difference is depending on the difference between all those specific attributes, as compared to the decision is also depending on the network. And in fact, it was more dependent on the network than on the difference. In fact, we found out, we'll see it in the next slide, that if they had prior contact with their customer, they had 97% chance of winning it. And if they had no prior contact, they had about 50% chance or 49% chance to have a winning. So actually we said to that company, what you should do is you should go to hiring people to get to know all these people in those communities, because it will upgrade your chance. So this is an example of to understand the span. So in fact, what we did and what we also changed was we started to change the idea of, you can talk about a direct or an indirect parameter. We started to use boxes with objects, and we also started to label them. And we started labeling, I don't have an example in this case, saying, okay, is this customer, is this information, or is this point that we're talking about now, are you knowing this visually? Is this a manual thought? Or do you have a tool to measure this parameter or attribute? Or do you have a machine to measure it? And there's also something about standards. Do you have a standard, what it should be versus what you're doing? As you're driving with a car, you can go as quickly as you want, but in certain zones, you need to employ the maximum standard, which is 60 kilometers per hour in this case. So what are the standards? Well, if you start adding those things to your parameter model, you're seeing that you don't have any standards and they don't measure it. It's all like intuitive thinking. So we came up with para-scientific formulas already. And of course, there are links to other TRIZ tools. So what is the conclusion? These attributes, in fact, can describe some business intangibles easier than a function attribute analysis. Of course, you need to be a bit more pragmatic. You can't take all the parameters you come up with. You need to choose better. So that's why we created some rules as free and span. And we came up with the idea of thinking errors. Voila, this is mainly my presentation. But I also have an extra for this seminar, which is I also made an overview of what you could say the attributes are at the lowest level linguistically spoken. Then you would have like objects. A function has a link to an object, but can also have an attribute. And a system is defined by functions, objects, and attributes. And an architecture, which would be like an organizational company or how they are organized, will depend on systems, functions, objects, attributes, but also people. And decisions will be made based on functions and data. And then a bigger level could be like business models, where you try to adapt as good as possible to your market. So marketing could be here. What I defined today is you could talk about smart knowledge. This is about capturing data. TRIZ is about, mostly for me, about smart technology, classical TRIZ at least, and then smart organization I'm missing in TRIZ. But okay, I'm not going to get in more details than this. This will this will be the end of my presentation. So I'm curious to see some questions coming. So thank you very much for the possibility.
Okay, Yves, thank you very much for your presentation. You know that we were talking about in technical TRIZ about either properties first, where TRIZ started, and contradictions are definitely based on the opposite states of properties. Then we moved to functional level, where we were talking about the functions. And then it's already after 2000s, I would say in the beginning of 2000s, we started to think about such things as main parameters of value for systems, because it became clear that, you know, the statistics that in 40% of situations, engineers work on the improvement of parameters that nobody wants to be improved. So it's 40% of R&D. Actually, it's total waste because there is misunderstanding what customers want, really. So the area of parameters is extremely interesting. My question would be very short right now, because we discussed it with you. So, but I just came to my mind. Once you try to model a complex system, you get lots of different attributes of parameters. How would you identify the most critical ones?
Yeah, so the first one is to split them up into free and span. So you need to be sure that they're independent and that they have to do something with the system. So the first models will contain a lot of parameters. But since you're targeting a specific problem, some of them will be skipped. It's a bit similar like in function analysis, where you could say, I'm sitting on the chair, I'm breathing air, and there is light, but you're not going to model these things because they're not important. They're not pragmatic important in your model. So this comes a bit, for me, natural, that if you look at a specific problem, you will model those aspects where you think they will have an issue with. To give again the same example, if I'm modeling how I'm drinking my wine, the light and the fact that I'm breathing air might not be the most important functions that I need to add in my function model. So also in function modeling, you're like pragmatically defining what you need to explain how the system works. So in a bit the same manner, Valerie.
Yeah, we are calling them meaningful, right? Which make meaning for that particular operation or behavior of a system. All right, thanks. There is a question from Richard. There, if you are touching upon the fundamentals as formulating your case, simplify and find the functions, then entering the abstraction level, solving the ideal solution, and transform it back to reality. What was the response from your customers? Did you guide them into the TRIZ, or you kept them kept them informed and showed the outcomes?
Well, we don't show the outcomes only. They are immersed in this modeling completely. So we take them and guide them through the modeling. While we are building the models for them, they see how we do it. And mostly they're starting to do it themselves afterwards with some guidance. So in fact, it's not only focused on, we go back, we analyze it, and we result with we come back with a solution. I want to involve the customer, and there's another very important reason to do that. The idea of not invented here syndrome. So you want your customer to be involved and to understand and to be fully immersed inside the analysis, so they can come up with some solutions maybe themselves. This is what you want. And I experienced this, we had an exercise where I had a company where we came up with a solution and they actually rejected it because it was not invented here. So I learned you need to take your customer along in the complete picture, in the complete process. And this helps a lot. I hope this answers your question.
We see the command, good, then it is. A question from listen one. What is the relation between attribute and parameter?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. From a TRIZ glossary point of view, and you can look it up in the TRIZ glossary Valerie made, he makes a difference between attributes and parameters. Parameter is a specific aspect of an attribute. But so maybe Valerie could give more specific definitions of those two. In fact, for me, it's a bit more fuzzy. I'm using these terms a bit mixed up at this level today. I'm not making a real difference between parameters and attributes, but there is a difference according to the TRIZ glossary.
Well, then I can switch to that. Actually, when I was making a glossary, I was referring to Marvin Minsky definition of frames in artificial intelligence, which is based on the attributes frame, where he described a concept of a frame. What is a frame? Frame has attributes. What is attribute? It is like a morphology, right? It is something that can have different states or different values. For example, attribute is the upper name for this abstraction. You can have values, like you can have, let's say, state, and then you have parameter. For example, if you have a physical object, it can have a color. Well, what is a value of a color? Well, you can also look at the you know that the color is a reflection of light, so you can have a look at electromagnetic wave and say the frequency, but frequency is not exactly a color. To get a color, you need something else. So it's difficult to define color in terms of values. Even worse, we have a state on an object. You know, we have several phase states. An object can be, the same object can be liquid, it can be gas, it can be solid. Again, there is no clear, let's say, mathematical or parametric definition of a state, right? We just divide states into some qualitative, well, chunks, I would say. That's why we call it attribute, which is more than just a parameter, which parameter has values, exact mathematical values, and state can have different qualitative states and values. Another question, object attribute parameter value is better understanding hierarchy structure. Object attribute parameter value. Yeah, if you go to object has attributes, every object. And parameter is just of the instances of attributes. And that parameter has value. Also attribute, if it's a state is an attribute also has its value, but it's not mathematical anymore. That's right. Attribute, another question. Attribute may be intangible. Parameters could be.
I would say that they both may be intangible or tangible. But for me, they're fully intangible because I've never seen temperature. If I would ask you, show me temperature, you will show me an object which is called a thermometer. You will show this is the temperature. And then you will say, yeah, read it yourself. So this is what you will do. So for me, everything from function to attributes, parameters is intangible. And we need a device to give us this information from my point of view.
All right, so now we are moving to theory of dualism, tangible and intangible. I propose to cut it short here.
Yeah,
we would need someone like Einstein to help us with that, right?
Yeah.
Also, Einstein did not actually recognize the dualism. You know, he was against it, but then he had to wake up. All right.
Thank you very much.
Okay. If that was great, thank you very much. And okay, we are moving to the final part of our conference, of our event. We still have plenty of people here. Thank you. Oh, wait a second. I got some. Oh no, that's something totally different.